Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's race is Bathurst, and it's Group 3, which means the Genesis is meta. And of course we have a few different options, but I went back to a classic anti-meta car for the anti-meta car of the week. Let's get into it. Once again, our anti-meta car of the week is the Lexus Rseat Eff, and make sure you use the newer one, not the older one. I considered a lot of different cars and even almost chose the GT500 Supra because it can actually do 9 laps on softs pretty easily, but it wasn't really able to mix it up with the modern cars when it came to actually battling in traffic. The Lexus isn't bad by any means, but it also isn't like a top 2 or 3 car, so I figured it would be a good car to fight the meta. While there is an RCF in the top 10, there's actually only a total of 7 of them in the entirety of the top 100, and as you can see, even scrolling through quickly, you can see the Genesis X is completely, overwhelmingly powerful. I was able to get a 59.5, and as you can see, there's a lot more left. Looking immediately to the right after the lap starts, we're going to look for the 50-meter board and then the light post before that. It is before that light post that we're going to hit the brakes, about 15 feet before. I like to turn in directly after the 50-meter board, get as close to this curb or even on top of it if you can, and then back on the throttle as early as you possibly can. You want to make sure that you're prioritizing your exit, getting on the throttle as early as possible rather than focusing on your mid-corner speed there. Obviously the speed you carry into the corner matters, but it's much more important how early you get on the throttle because of how long this straight is and the fact that it's uphill. This car loves to be revved out, so make sure you use all of the available revs. As the meter boards start on the left, we're going to look for the 100-meter board. Directly after that is a bit of an access road, and at the very end of the access road when the grass starts is our braking point. Turn in after you pass the 50-meter board and try to get as close to the curb early on as you possibly can. I think there's some really unique banking really close to the curb, so if you hit a late apex, it really just makes you lose speed here. After this lap, I was able to dip down to second briefly to get a better exit here, so you might want to try that too. On the right side of the track, you can see the barrier moves in a little bit. We're going to use the shape of the barrier to guide us, and we're going to turn in at the hole in the wall. When you get past this bend, we're going to lift off the throttle, and when you can see that armor all sign in the distance, that's when you want to hit the brakes. Full braking for just a moment. We want to make sure we don't go over this white line, and looking at this little crack in the middle of the road, we want to start turning in at the beginning of it, and you want to be off the brakes in first gear by the end of it. Here we want to turn in sharply to get as close to the wall as we can, but then straighten out the wheel in second gear as you accelerate, making sure you don't slide at all. That's going to cost you a lot of time. We want to be a little bit to the left of the wall so we can have room to turn in and get really close and not track out and hit this exit wall right here. This beautiful tree right here is the perfect time to turn in. You want to stay full throttle in third gear as you turn in. We're going to lift just barely as we upshift to fourth and get as close to the inside corner as we possibly can. You've got to be really brave here to make sure you don't lose too much speed. Take note of my line here. I'm not tracking out all the way. In fact, I'm staying really tight to the inside because if you go over this crest while you're on the outside, it'll suck you directly into that outside wall. Aim for just right of this tree right here and stay fully brave on that throttle. The lowest part of this dip is when you want to be closest to the wall, and that's also when you want to shift up to fifth, trying to maintain a steady curve, a steady angle going into this. We then lift just gently to get ourselves away from this wall and then get back on that throttle as early as you can. I like to start turning in just early enough so I barely touch the curb here, and we're going to lift off the throttle, not all the way, but just enough to make sure the front end doesn't lift off as we go over the curb and as we go over that crest. Bravery is rewarded with pace here, so be as brave on the throttle as you can. Using the curve of the wall to guide us for the shape of our turn-in, we want to lift off the throttle right before going underneath that Audi R8 sign. Once fully past this sign, gently brake to get yourself as close to this wall on the right as you possibly can, then downshift to fourth. Add a little bit more brake in a straight line until you get to the beginning of the curbing on the left, and then we're going to lift off the brakes just gently so we can turn off and use as much of that curb as possible. Once fully past this curve, we should be braking in a straight line to just left of the red part of the wall in the distance right here. Staying in second gear and gradually coming entirely off the brakes will allow you to hug this corner. I like to blip the throttle just barely as I'm steering to the right, then I lift as I turn in, add a little bit of brakes to get really close to the dipper right here, up to third gear, and then back full throttle trying to go straight over this curb. If you add too much steering, it's going to make you slide, and if you don't steer enough, you're going to hit that wall. Hug the left around this corner until you get to the white part of the wall on the right. Then we're going to shift up to fourth, lift off gently, and try to hug the right side of the corner after this. Look for this little crest right here where the road really drops off. We're going to hit the brakes fully right before that and aim for the edge of the Falcon sign in the distance, getting down to second gear. At the beginning of the Falcon sign on the left wall, that's when we're going to shift down to first gear and turn in heavily. The inside wall gets taller briefly, and at the end of that tall portion, we want to shift up to second gear and then fully get on that throttle as early as you possibly can, but avoid oversteer at all costs. And of course, make sure you don't hit that exit wall. Either of those things will completely ruin your lap. Now, it's important for these really long straights, especially back straights like this, to not get complacent. There have been so many times where I've had a really good lap and then I relax too much on the back straight and then forget how intense I needed to be and how much I needed to concentrate for the next part of the lap. That might not be an issue if you don't have ADHD like me though. Stay close to that inside kink, look for the 150 meter board, and at the end of the sign event wording on the right, that is when we're going to hit the brakes. Be very patient. You want to be in third gear and past the 50 meter board before you start to turn in. Skip over this inside part of the curb, but continue steering left as you gently get back on that throttle. Don't steer too much, however, because if you steer a lot and you're on the throttle really heavily on those curbs, you can make yourself slide, and of course that'll ruin your entire lap. A lot of people mess up their lap or their race by touching the grass at the entrance and or the exit of this corner, so be very careful. Right before the red and white stripes end on the left, we want to hit the brakes heavily, of course in a straight line, and right where the grass ends on the right is when we want to turn in. Dip down to first gear, try to avoid going up on that curb, but get back into second gear and then get back on that throttle. Like I said before, avoid the grass at all costs and be very careful if you use that curbing on the exit too. You can slip out pretty easily. Alright, full speed time. Like I mentioned in the breakdown, you want to make sure that you're prioritizing the exit over the mid-corner speed here. What I mean by that is you could potentially slow down a little bit less for that corner, but then it's going to take you longer to get on the throttle. While your average speed around the corner might be higher, you're going to end up going slower by the end of this straight. So that is why we want to make sure that we prioritize the exit and getting on the throttle as early as we possibly can. I'd experiment with braking even later than I did here and definitely try to use second gear. I didn't really discover how much faster it could be until after setting this lap. I was actually about a half-tenth faster when I did dip down to second gear. For this corner, you want to make sure you brake really heavily in a straight line and then come off the brakes as early as you possibly can. If you steer too much while you're getting on the throttle, that can cause you to spin out. So if you're having trouble with that, try to straighten out the wheel before you get on the throttle. Lifting off even slightly too much for that right-handed kink can make you lose a lot of time. If you use this curbing on the inside too much, or if you hit it too early, it's going to make you bounce into that wall. And it's the same with this outside curbing here, but the opposite effect. If you go over that curbing too much, it's going to send you off into the grass. You can actually save a lot more of your braking for right before the right-handed tight part of the corner. And unlike real life, you can get a penalty if you go too close to the dipper there on the left, which is really silly. It's probably the stupidest penalty in the entire game. This left-hander is just like the first corner. You have to prioritize getting on the throttle as early as you possibly can and not sliding your tires to make sure that you can carry enough speed down the straight. If you've ever seen the Mythbusters series of Gran Turismo videos, that's actually my series too, and in it I discuss the two types of kangaroos you can see, the family on the left and then the guy that does laps on the right. Anyways, I digress. On this corner, you gotta be super brave too. Definitely skip over this part of the curb, but continue steering to the left as you get on the throttle. The grass is your enemy for all of these corners here. Do not touch the grass. You have to do everything you can to avoid it because it will it's impossible to hit the grass and not have it ruin your lap, especially on that final exit. Alright, let's talk race strategy. First off, I want to say that we are really spoiled for having this race the way it is this week. Unlike a lot of the previous weeks when you have to pit but you don't have to do anything with the tires, it is required that you use 2 compounds, which means you definitely have to take tires when you're in the pits. The vast majority of cars only need to do 3 or 4 laps on the medium tires and the rest will be done on the softs. However, with the really crazy cars like most mid-engine cars or cars like the Corvette, you're going to have to spend more time on the mediums because the tires will die at the end if you're using really long stints on the soft tire. I mentioned before that I almost chose the GT500 Supra as the anti-meta car, and that's because it's one of the rare cars that can actually pit on lap 1 to take soft tires and then go the rest of the race pretty easily without having to worry about the tires killing you. The only issue with that is even at its best pace, it really isn't that fast, so if you do find yourself having to battle other people, you're most likely not going to have very much of an advantage. The Genesis doesn't have great tire wear, but it's not as terrible as we've seen in other races, so it's really incredibly OP this week. For this car, I think a window of anywhere between 2 and 4 laps on the medium tires is going to be just fine. But this is an interesting situation. A lot of people, even if he didn't have to move to avoid KP Wilcox right there, kid named Frank move to the right. And that actually opened up the slipstream for me. A lot of people actually end up defending on the right. If you have people in front of you and you are worried about someone passing you on the outside, I'd take a chance on actually staying behind the people who are giving you slipstream unless you know that person is going to be able to get in front of you. In which case, the inside line going for turn 2 is much, much better because of the camber of the corner. As always, with any kind of track that has walls, you have to be very careful of people who are going to find those walls. Barry R is very unforgiving this week. You'll notice I checked up instead of trying to go through the ghost of the Porsche. I probably could have made it, but on the off chance that it was going to solidify before I could get through it, I didn't want to take that chance. It's much better here just to be safe, because not only can you get yourself a penalty from hitting the wall, you'll also take damage, so it's kind of a double whammy. If you see people really off the line, you can assume they're going to be off the line in the next corner too, so that's a really good way to know exactly how you want to set up a pass in that section. This is probably common knowledge by now, but just in case it's not something you've thought about, cars are going to brake a little bit worse, and they're going to turn in a little bit slower when you've got all the fuel weight to worry about, as well as the tire wear, so be wary of that. Back to the tire strategy really quick. We're starting from the back, so it makes sense that we're going to use the worst tire compound at the beginning so that we can get an undercut kind of strategy, have a lot of clean air, but it might also benefit you from doing the same thing if you've qualified closer to the front. Two things to consider, actually probably more than two things, but two things immediately. Firstly, people are going to have a tough time passing you even if you're on the worst tire compound. So if you can keep people behind you who are on a good tire compound while you're on the bad tire compound, it can cause them to really eat up their tires, making their overall pace worse, as well as slow down their entire strategy. If you know your opponent and you know that you're much faster than them, if they start on softs and you're starting in front of them on mediums, there's a good chance you'll actually be able to catch up to them or keep up with them even though they're on a faster tire compound. And then because of the many straights on this track, you'll be able to stay within their slipstream and not really lose a lot of time, making their soft stint pretty much worthless. So once again, we find ourselves in front of our boy Grove, and I don't know exactly why he's allowing me to stay in front. He could have definitely passed me by now. It might be the kind of thing where we don't want to battle too much during the twisty parts of the track, or he might have just wanted to push me and work with me. Either way, I appreciate it, and it's actually because of him choosing not to battle that I was able to get a pretty good result in this race. So again, shout out to Grove. Thank you very much, sir. Jumping forward just a bit, I wasn't able to get in front of Peepo just yet. I probably could have gone for a dive there, and I might have even been able to go for a dive here, but that would not be a good idea. You do not want to pass people before T1 because this straight is so long. If you get in front of someone at T1, chances are you're going to stay in front of them around the corner, and then they're just going to have slipstream and they're going to be able to pass you. Since I had Peepo's slipstream, I was able to get next to him going up the hill, and even if Mike did have, well, he does have overspeed, he'd have to choose one of us to bump draft, and I was lucky that he chose me. Having someone to draft with going up that hill is really useful if you are defending against someone, because the lane is not wide enough for 3 cars. I don't think I've ever seen anyone go 3 wide there. At least I've never seen anyone go 3 wide there without some kind of disaster. So the slipstream can definitely help you stay away from someone who has your slipstream, but as you can see, the Genesis was still able to get way, way faster than either of us, despite the fact that I did have that slipstream. As I said before, we're going to pit on lap 3 to take the softs, but I wanted to show you this. You do not have to enter the pit super early. That first line that you see is not super important. As long as you don't go over the grass, you should be fine, so you can brake right at the beginning of where the lane splits off. One of the really unfortunate things about this game is if you accidentally click the wrong thing in the pits, you can't say just kidding, you can't hit circle and go back. It is a permanent choice, which is of course super, super unrealistic. Obviously, your entire team is going to be making these decisions. You're not just going to go in and say one tire and then they're going to have to listen to you and you can't take it back. It's silly, but I say this because I've accidentally pushed the wrong thing, and I've actually watched someone accidentally lose a lot of money in a really big tournament by accidentally hitting the wrong choice. So the lesson to be learned here is make sure you take a second and choose the right tires. And of course, don't take fuel. Now, no matter where you start, if you go into the pits early, you're probably going to run into some kind of traffic. Pretty much no matter what. If you're towards the front, you're going to have an even higher chance of running into traffic, especially if you are pitting super early. So be very wary of that. The risk that you take by pitting super early at the front, as we talked about earlier, is that you might run into traffic, but of course you might also mess up people behind you who have the soft strategy, which could allow you to pull off an easier victory. Just things to think about. Another thing I don't think I talk about quite enough is the overspeed you get from being in someone's slipstream. You're going to be going a lot faster by the braking point when you're in someone's slip this entire time, so you've got to brake earlier, and your aerodynamics are going to be less effective, so you got to turn in earlier. You just have to pretty much plan for your car not working as well as it usually would and be extra careful, especially in those braking zones. I mentioned earlier that it might not be a good time to pass before turn 1, but of course if someone messes up, you definitely want to take the opportunity to try to get in front of them. Well, maybe not definitely. This is where car knowledge really comes into play. I want to take a moment to shout out Avalarian. The guy that we just passed is actually my livery designer. He is a fantastic dude. I absolutely love him. Thank you to Avalarian for also uploading this video. But what I was going to say is the Hyundai, the old one, not the Genesis X, is really, really bad when it comes to the straight. Now, the slipstream does help that out, and you did see that he was able to give me a bump, but all I would have to do is move to the right just a little bit, and he would not be able to pass me at all on that straight, because that car is unfortunately just sad. It was really nerfed after they released the Genesis X. So if you can pass that car before the straight, just move to the right and you won't really have to worry about it. I've also talked about really knowing your opponents. KP Wilcox is an incredibly fast driver. He has outqualified me, I think, every single time that we've done a manufacturer's or a nation's race in the past couple seasons. I think. I'm not quite sure, but he's definitely outqualified me a lot in the same machinery too. But knowing him, he's a controller player, and that means that his tire wear is not going to be nearly as good as mine because it's almost impossible to save tires with the controller. I can't stress enough that I'm not trying to talk down about KP whatsoever. I am talking about his controller and nothing else. It's just that the controller doesn't allow you to have the same kind of feel, and you can't turn the steering wheel the same way as you use the sticks. So it's almost impossible to have good tire wear with the controller. It's entirely the controller, not KP. But anyways, as you can see from the fact that he bumped the wall and went into the grass before Skyline, he obviously has very good car control, and like I said, he always outqualifies me. But with that said, my plan right now, only being halfway through the race, even though he is on tires that are one lap newer than mine, I was pretty sure I was going to be able to get in front of him by the time his tires started wearing at the end. So right now, I'm not really thinking too much about attacking as much as I want to just stay behind him. That doesn't mean I'm not going to go for an opportunity if I see one, but I'm not going to be super aggressive with it. Actually, as I'm doing this voiceover and watching this lap, I'm remembering how this lap went, and this is actually the perfect opportunity to see exactly how OP the Genesis is. I didn't actually have an opportunity whatsoever to make a move here. Even if I did have an opportunity to go for a move, I would not do it right now. The plan right now is to follow him as long as I possibly can, because like I said, he's incredibly fast, and if tire wear becomes an issue for him, which I assumed it wouldn't become an issue until the end of his stint. So if I were to battle him when he still had really good tires, knowing that he's a very fast driver, it's going to slow both of us down and eat up both of our tires. I might end up in front of him, but I'd probably lose a position or lose an opportunity to take someone else's position. And as you can see, I'm actually no match for him up the hill at all. Taking it a step deeper than that, if we look at the people who are in front of us, we just have Grove, Roger, and Beyond Limits. Beyond Limits just came out of the pits. Now, I don't know if he had a really long medium stint or if he's now on the mediums, but it was very clear that we were faster than him considering the fact that he was way ahead of us by the first corner, and now KP was right on his tail. I knew that neither Roger or Grove had actually gone to the pits yet, but even if I didn't know, I could tell by the pit delta that if they did have to go to the pits, they were going to end up behind. It's only 18 seconds between myself and Grove. That meant that Roger obviously was even closer than that, and if they both have to go to the pits, they were going to end up behind because the pit delta is something like 22, 23, maybe even 24 seconds. So obviously what we can conclude from that is that Beyond Limits is the only person standing between myself and KP and certain victory for one of us. With how close KP was, it pretty much seemed like it was inevitable that he was going to pass Beyond Limits. But I was creeping further and further away from KP, which meant that I might not be able to take the opportunity to pass him when KP eventually passes him. On top of that, if things get crazy, Avalarian is close enough to me that if I make a mistake trying to pass him, Avalarian could then get in front of me. When I was first watching this, as I was doing this, I thought that Beyond Limits was weaving on the straights, but it could be argued that he was actually just taking his normal line and then doing a single defensive move after that. But when you look here, he completely squeezed KP off the track, putting 2 tires in the grass, and then just continuing on like nothing happened. That is poor sportsmanship, and that is also cowardice. I hate to say it, but these are the things you really have to pay attention to. If he's willing to put KP in a situation where KP has to brake with 2 tires in the grass, that's poor sportsmanship, and he's going to do the same thing to anyone who tries to pass him. I don't like that. And when people do that, you have to be extra aggressive when you pass them, or they're just going to take advantage of the fact that there's no penalties for that kind of thing in this game. The positive thing to think about, though, is the fact that KP caught up to him so quickly, and if he's willing to do something desperate, that means he probably doesn't really have any kind of pace to back up his driving. So it's really inevitable, like I've been saying, that KP's going to pass him. This is also a perfect opportunity to talk about damage mitigation when it comes to these races. If you are going to get passed by someone, if it's really only a matter of time before that person's going to pass you, if it's really unrealistic for you to think that you could defend for 3 more laps, then over-defending is just going to hurt you. This is really funny. I'm actually really flexing my complete lack of a short-term memory. He actually is weaving down the straight, which is the most cowardly move possible. I absolutely hate when people do that. It's against the sportsmanship rules, and like I said before, it's really just going to bite him in the butt. When KP was chasing him, I was not able to keep up with them. And if KP was to get in front of him, he would probably be able to stick with KP. Instead, he's trying to defend every single corner and go beyond just normal defending, weaving down the straights to try to break the slipstream, which I can't stop saying enough. I hate that. It is cowardly. He's also waiting until KP's about to make a move to then make his defense, which it's iffy at best. You can make a late defense as long as you don't close it off, but when you get to the point where you make people run into you, which he's been very close to multiple times, it's sad. Now, this is really funny. Because he's been defending so much, and because he's trying to go for an outside line here, I easily just get to sneak by him following KP right there. And as you can see, I immediately tracked out. I wasn't going to give him an inch. I hate the way that guy was driving. Beyond Limits, if you're watching, I'm sorry. That goes beyond good defending. That goes beyond hard defending. It was just silly, and that is why you got your position taken. That is why we both took your position. If you had worked with KP, who was obviously faster than you, for even 1 more lap, there's a chance I wouldn't be able to pass. But instead, because of the silliness, you lost 2 positions, and that's just how it goes. Now, if you want to see what actually good defending looks like, let's take a look at KP. Now, like I predicted, I'm pretty sure his tires were pretty toasty right about now. I'm just assuming because I was able to get so much closer this time. I don't really know, but I do think that's because of his tires. Simply sticking to the inside line going into turn 2 makes it virtually impossible to pass on the outside. Now, I turned in a little bit early. That was not KP's fault, that was my fault. Even if I didn't turn in early, if I turned in at the correct time, I would not be able to get around him, especially not in the current situation that we're in. Now, I don't know if I was just heated or if I just wanted to have fun trying to pass KP, but that was actually a big mistake on my part. I should have just pushed KP when I got the opportunity, or just moved back and made it really obvious I wasn't going to go for a pass, because if I made an even bigger mistake than that, or if I made one more mistake, you can see that Beyond Limits is well within my slipstream range, and if I didn't break that, I was going to be in trouble on the next straight. I always talk about dirty air, and I talk about the effects of having really messed up tires, or tires that are really near the end of their life. But it's important to think about, when you have both of those things to consider, how much differently the car is going to handle. The tires are going to feel like gum, the aero's not going to work quite as well, and those things in conjunction can make the car feel really, really weird, so you've got to be extra careful. I was really lucky that I had a lot of experience with this car, so I was able to actually get pretty close to KP, and that allowed me to go for a move here. Once again, take note of the fact that KP's holding his line, he's not weaving like crazy, and he's not squeezing me off the track like a certain other person that we just watched earlier on in this race. Now right here, you can see that KP actually lifted off. It's a really good idea to not try to waste time. I don't know if he was worried about the people behind, or if he just wanted to set me up for a pass. It could also be that he was just letting me have the position because he's a sweetheart. I actually think he was doing the smart thing and just doing some kind of damage mitigation here. You can tell by how far back he is now that his tires are probably gone off. I don't think he just gave up, because KP loves racing, and so I really do think that it's his tires, like I've been predicting the entire race. Furthermore, to solidify that fact, you can see that I'm actually gaining on him despite the fact that he's got the slipstream and he's in the Jenny. So yeah, I think his tires are just going off. And if your tires are going off, if you continue battling, you could really risk completely throwing away your race. So I think he was just doing the smart thing, taking a second instead of a third or worse. With all of that said, you can see that he's actually still on my tail, and there's just a really good chance that KP really enjoys helping me out. In the past, he's actually just given me wins. He's just slammed on his brakes at the end, so I don't know. He might just be giving me the free content because it does look really cool getting a win from the back for these videos. So KP, big shout out to you. Thank you for racing cleanly, and you're amazing. Thank you again for watching. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and as promised, 1 week from today, I will start streaming every Wednesday here on this channel. We're going to start off with some top split nations action going into Manu as that season starts, and whenever there's not a competitive season, we're probably just going to do some daily races. Stay tuned.